Episode 27, Totally Shameless. After a while, Grandma felt a bit tired, so she slowly stood up, her bony figure looking forlorn. As she turned around and returned to her room, she muttered to herself, "Let's go. The further we go, the better. We must never come back here." Natalie covered her face and sobbed silently. She knew that there were some things she couldn't do anything about. If her grandmother didn't leave with her this time, she would never see her again after she returned to England. Liam's eyes widened in confusion. He wanted to comfort his mommy, but he didn't know what to say. When he was in England, he would often see his mother crying like this late at night. He was still young, so he didn't know why she was sad, but he vowed to grow up quickly and protect her so that she wouldn't cry anymore. The next morning, Natalie arranged for her grandmother to return to her hometown, and then she packed up her luggage and prepared to return to England with Liam. After what had happened with her family, she no longer had any lingering feelings for this country. Returning to England was something that she urgently needed to do. But when she was standing in line at the airport to buy a ticket, she found out that her name had been blacklisted. It was impossible for her to get on a plane. She didn't understand. She thought there must be a problem with the airline, so she went to multiple windows and tried several different companies before accepting the truth. She had been blacklisted and couldn't leave the country. She suddenly thought back to her father's face when she had run away from him. At that moment, she realized that someone must have done this on purpose. Never in her wildest dreams would she have thought that her father, who had raised her, could be so ruthless toward her. As she sat in the departure lounge, feeling angry, a shadow suddenly shrouded her entire body. She raised her head and saw her stepsister standing in front of her, looking down. From where she sat, she could see the satisfaction in her eyes. "You did this, didn't you? Cheryl, you're crazy!" Natalie had already guessed that this had something to do with her stepsister, and seeing her standing in front of her, she wanted to rip her apart. Cheryl was like this. She would always appear when Natalie was at her weakest and then deal her a fatal blow. It had happened 5 years ago, and it was happening again. If they weren't in an airport filled with security guards, she would have lunged at her. Cheryl sneered. When she saw Liam in Natalie's arms, surprise flashed in her eyes. She said arrogantly, "Give it up. As long as you refuse to compromise, you won't be able to leave. Nick's aunt is an airline executive. We can make sure you'll never be able to buy a plane ticket." Cheryl recalled the hesitation in Nick's eyes when he had first heard her request. "Oh yeah, and not only that, Dad has found a way to revoke your residency in England, so you can't go back there." Natalie was so angry that her entire body was trembling. She looked at Cheryl, who was laughing gleefully. At that moment, she felt that her sister was extremely ugly. "You really are going all out to force my hand. You're totally shameless. If Nick sees you like this, do you think he will still love you?" Natalie sneered. Cheryl's eyes glinted unnaturally, but she refused to back off. "You don't have to worry about Nick. You should just concentrate on your situation," Cheryl said villainously. "I think Evan Wilson is a good person. He's more than enough for you. After all, you're no longer the girl you were back then. Have you forgotten that you have a fatherless child?" These words stabbed at Natalie's weakest spot. Cheryl could say whatever she wanted, but Liam was innocent. She could no longer control her emotions and chased Cheryl away. Cheryl didn't put up too much resistance. On the contrary, when she saw Natalie trembling with rage, she said proudly, "Don't be reckless. Think about it carefully. I'll wait for you to change your mind." Watching Cheryl's retreating back, Natalie grew extremely resentful. At that moment, Liam also felt frightened. His auntie was too awful. He quickly comforted Natalie.
"Mommy, don't be angry. Let's ignore that nasty lady."
Seeing him being so well-behaved and sensible, Natalie's mood gradually eased. Now that this had happened, she could only resign herself to the fact that she was unable to leave the country and would be forced to settle here. But even so, Her family trying to force her to marry that disgusting old man was too much. She wouldn't obey unless she was dead. Until then, she would fight. Over the next 2 days, Natalie found a house to rent in the city. After all, she still had Liam to raise, so she couldn't sit still and wait for death. On the first day, they moved into their new home. Liam looked around and asked,
Mommy, are the bad guys bullying us so much that we can't go home? Why don't you go find Daddy?
Natalie laughed in her heart. Liam always mistook Bryce for his father. She had never had anything to do with Bryce before, and she would never have anything to do with him again. She pretended to be angry and said, Liam, don't ever mention him again, okay? He's not your father. In a split second, Liam's expression became very dejected. He lowered his head and did not say a word. When Natalie saw this, she realized how desperately he wanted a dad, and her heart ached for him. She quickly squatted down and hugged him. Don't be sad, okay? I promise you that you are not a fatherless child. I will help you find your real daddy, okay? After hearing this, Liam's aggrieved expression relaxed slightly. He had a lot of questions about Bryce, but when he thought about what his mother had said, he didn't say anything. Eventually, he fell asleep in her arms. Natalie hugged him and patted his back. She was confused. So many things had happened in the past few days to disrupt their peaceful life. She regretted thinking about Nick and how she had been forced into this situation by her family. But luckily, she still had Liam. As long as she worked hard to create a stable life for him, it didn't matter what her family did. She would live a better life than the one they wanted for her.
Full story is available at novelpalace.com. Click the link in the comment section to get it free.